All right, guys, we're looking at page 47 in our student journal. We're talking about quadratic equations. If you notice our goal on the board, it says I can solve quadratics by graphing, factoring, and using square roots. It also says you can do your homework assignment. I put it online if some of you like doing it that way. So if you'd like to do the assignment online, you can, or you can just do it on paper. Okay. We have some definitions to start with. A quadratic equation in one variable just means that we have an equation that can be written in this form. So we have just a single variable of x, and we can get it set equal to 0. This is our standard form for the parabola. The next thing is a root of an equation. This is probably a new term for you, but a root of an equation is simply a solution of the equation. Another term is a zero of a function. This is an x value for which f of x equals 0. All of these mean really pretty much the same thing. A root, a zero, they're going to be whatever makes the function equal 0. What else could those be called? Yeah. X-intercepts. Just x-intercepts, though. They wouldn't be y-intercepts. Just x-intercepts. Because a y-intercept would be when x equals 0 and not when y equals 0. Okay, another thing you could see these called is just solutions. So pretty much all of these terms mean the same thing. If it says find the roots, that means find the solutions. Find the zeros, find the x-intercepts. It all is the same. Now, methods we can use. One method is by graphing. We can just find out when y equals 0, what are the x's that force the y value to be 0. We can use square roots. Anytime we have an equation in the form u squared equals d, I can solve for u. U squared equals d. What I would have to do is take the square root of both sides. But do you know what I'd have to put in front of the d when I take the square root of the equation? Isaiah?
Plus or minus sign?
Yeah. So this would be actually plus or minus d. So in other words, if I had x squared equals 100, my answer is not just 10. 10 squared is 100, but isn't also negative 10 squared? Negative 10 times negative 10, wouldn't that also be 100? So that's why when we take the square root of this, it has to be plus or minus. The last way is by factoring. We need to get the equation into factored form, and then we can use our zero product property, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So by graphing, I've got this equation here. We're going to solve it by graphing. To solve it by graphing, I'm going to get a set equal to 0. So once I have it in this form, I can go to y equals. I can put in x plus 3, quantity squared, minus 16. We can do a zoom 6. Here's our function. We're trying to find out where does the function equal 0. What do I go to do that? I also had to put in y equals 0, guys. Where do I go to here? Intersect is the place to go, because I put in y equals 0. You can do 0, but it's actually harder to do it that way. So I just always do intersect. And now I want to get kind of close to it, so I go enter, enter, enter. And it tells me that one of my solutions then, we'll write it in our solution set as 1. My other solution, I do second, trace, calculate, intersect. And I want to get over there close. I'm going to do enter, enter, enter. and it tells me it's negative 7. So that was pretty easy, wasn't it, to do it by graphing? What about by using square roots? What would I do to both sides to solve this with square roots? Take the square root of both sides, and I get x plus 3. What do I have to put in front of this when I do it? What do we put? Plus or minus. So it's plus or minus 4. So now I have to solve that. So I've got two things to work with. I have actually x plus 3 equals 4, but I also have x plus 3 equals negative 4, because it can equal positive or negative. So if I solve this, I subtract 3. And on this, I subtract 3. And I get those two solutions. When I use interval notation, the smaller number always comes first. But this is telling me solution set, so it doesn't really matter which one comes first here. See how we got the same answers using both methods. The last method I want you to look at is factoring. If I'm going to do factoring with this, I have to get it set equal to 0 for factoring. So I have to get x plus 3 squared minus 16 equals 0. I would now have to multiply this all out. X plus 3 squared means this, x plus 3 times x plus 3. That's going to be x squared plus 6x plus 9. That's going to give me x squared plus 6x minus 7. Now I can use factoring. I set up my double parentheses. I say x and x. What are numbers that multiply to be 7 and subtract to be 6? 7 and 1. I need to get a positive 6 when I do the outers and inners. So what needs to be positive?
7.
And so now I have my solutions. I can also write them like this. It means the same thing as these others. So I can write it like that if I'd like. So the three methods, graphing, we have to put it into the calculator. This goes into y sub 1, into y sub 2. Square roots, we take the square root of both sides, we put a plus or minus. Factoring, we have to get it set equal to 0 and then solve it from there. All right, let's go over here now to the back. The zero property. This is extremely important. Even some of my calculus students tend to make errors on the zero product property. It seems obvious, but I want to go over it because people still get confused on it. If the product of two expressions is 0, then one or both of the expressions equals 0. Here's what we're saying. If I have two numbers, blank times 4 equals 0, what has to be in that blank? 0. What if I have blank times 2 must equal 24? What could go in that blank? What would go in that blank? But would those be the only two numbers that would multiply to be 24? What other numbers would multiply to be 24? 6 and 4, 3 and 8. There's lots of things that would multiply to be 24. But if I have two numbers that multiply to be 0, what must be true of these? One has to be 0. But if I have two numbers that just multiply, say, to be 8, is it true that one of them must be 8? No. I actually want to do this problem first. This one right here first. Is it set equal to 0? Is it factored? So therefore, all I have to do is set x plus 4 equal to 0 and x minus 2 equals to 0. One of them must be 0. What's the solution for this one going to be? Negative 4. What's the solution to this one going to be? 2. So there's our solution, negative 4 and 2. What about here, though? Look at the difference. Here we have x plus 2, x plus 4, x minus 2. Same thing here, but now it has to equal 7. here's what I see people do. Oh, x plus 4 must be 7, or x minus 2 must be 7. Is that true? No, that is not true. What we must do on this is get it set equal to 0. So I'm going to multiply this out first. That's x squared. That's negative 2x, positive 4x. This is going to be negative 8. So now what do we have to do? Get it set equal to 0. And now I want you guys to finish it and come up with the solution. Did you get it right? Negative 5 and 3? Does it matter which order we write them in? No. All right, let's go back up here. First thing we do, check. Is it equal to 0? Yes. Ready to factor. What are numbers that multiply to be 15 and add to be 8? 3 and 5. Finish. Jenna, what are we going to get? Good. There would be our solutions. So if it's set equal to 0, we just need to decide. And here's another thing I see on this one. People start multiplying this all out. That doesn't make sense. It's already factored. You don't want to multiply it out if it's already factored. But this one was not factored, so we had to factor it. Why did we multiply this one out and not that one? Raise your hand. Why did we multiply this out, did not multiply that one? Why is it, then?
Because the third one was equal to 7, and we get it equal to 0.
Correct. That's the key right there. All right. Graphing on the calculator, what did I say to get it equal to? We're not going to do any of these, but how would you do them? Get them set equal to what? 0, and then put one of them into y sub 1, one into y sub 2, and then look for the point of what? Intersection. All right, we're going to solve using square roots. We're going to do number 5. If we're going to solve using square roots, this quantity squared must be by itself. So what are we going to do to both sides first? Add 19. Once we have it to this point, now we take the square root of both sides. So we have 2t plus 3 equals plus or minus 10. So I would have to subtract 3. I'm going to subtract 3. When I do that, I'm going to get 2t here. But I'm going to get 2 answers for this. So I'm going to have to write 2t twice. Positive 10 minus 3 is 7. Negative 10 minus 3 is negative 13. So now I'm going to have t is going to be equal to 7 halves, and then t is also going to be equal to negative 13 halves. On this one, what would you do first? We're not going to do the whole thing, but what would you do first? Actually, let's go ahead and do it. We would multiply this by 7, guys, to get rid of the fractions. So we're going to get p squared equals 5p squared minus 140. You see what I did? 1 over 7 times 7 is 1. 5 over 7 times 7 is 5. 20 times 7 is 140. So now I'm going to have to subtract 5p squared. I get negative 4p squared equals negative 140. So after we get that, then we're going to divide by -4. Watch how I divide this, guys. This will make your life go faster when you do this. I'm going to go ahead and divide them just both by 2. And I'm going to get 70 over 2. 70 divided by 2 is easy. It's 35. And so now I'm going to take the square root, and I have plus or minus radical 35. All right, let's go over to the next page. Factoring. I'd like for you all to try number 8 on your own. You can watch up here if you get stuck. Any questions? Should have gotten 10 and 4. All right. What about this one? What do we have to get a set equal to? 0. Add x squared. Subtract 4x. So 5x squared plus x squared is 6x squared. 5x minus 4x is x. Minus 1 equals 0. It's a little more difficult to factor when you have a coefficient that's not just a 1. So set up your double parentheses. We get 3x and 2x. So 3 times 2 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. Now when I check my outers, I get 3x. My inners are 2x. I want to get a positive 1. How am I going to get a positive 1? Which one needs to be positive to get a positive 1 when I combine those? The 3, right? So this has to be positive, this has to be negative. So now I would get a positive 3x, a negative 2x, and that will give it to us. So now you should be able to solve this. X is going to equal. You'd have to take over the 1 and divide by 3. What are you going to get? Figure out the answers, guys. Mia, do you have it? It'd be negative a half, wouldn't it? Because it's 2x plus 1, so you'd have to subtract 1. And then what else? Right. Those would be our 2 solutions. All right, let's look here. Which equations have roots that are equivalent to the x-intercepts of the graph shown? So here's the graph we're shown. You want to be thinking about what are the intercepts here. Mary, what are they?
-1, 4.
Good. So I'm looking for x equals -1 and x equals 4 as solutions. It would take us too long to do every one of these. We're just going to do a couple. Let's check these 3. Okay, guys, look at this one. We should be able to very quickly check this to see if we're going to get -1 and 4. Because it's already equal to 0. Ella, what are we going to get?
+1 and -1.
So did that work?
No.
Nope, so this is not going to work. On this one, what would I want to use? Which method? Square roots, right? So I'm going to take this over. I'm going to have x minus 1 squared equals -4. When you get a negative, you should stop for a minute. Is it possible for something squared to equal a negative? No. So this is going to have no solution. You don't need to follow along, but let me show you why. If I put this into the calculator, x minus 1 squared plus 4. Look at it. You should already know this. Where's that vertex? See how the vertex is at 1, 4? 1, 4 is the vertex. It opens up. Is it ever going to have any x-intercepts? So it's not going to have any roots that are the same as this. So it's not going to work. Last one we'll check is this one. Have to get a set equal to 0. How can I make it easier to factor? Since it's an equation, I'm allowed to divide or multiply by numbers. Not by x's, but by numbers. What can I divide it through by then? 6. And it would turn into x squared minus 3x minus 4. Now we can try to factor xx. What are numbers that multiply to be 4 and subtract to be 3? 4 and 1. I want to get a negative 4, positive 1. So now when I solve it, x equals 4, negative 1. Is that the same? Is it the same as this one? Yep. So this one does work. And this is the only one that would work of the ones we checked. We could go back and check the others, but... Okay, last thing here, number 11. A skydiver drops out of an airplane that is flying at an altitude of 4,624 feet, almost a mile high. Use the formula h equals negative 16t squared plus h sub 0 to write an equation that gives the skydiver's height in feet during free fall t seconds after the skydiver drops out of the airplane. All right, so they want us to use this formula. We want to know what's the height at any given time. Well, we have to plug in for h sub 0. Does anyone know what h sub 0 means? It means the height at time 0. So what is the height at time 0? Not 0. Where's he starting from? Yeah, he's starting from that high up, isn't he? So our formula then is h equals negative 16t squared plus 4,624. That would be the equation that would tell his height at any given time. Now, with your group, I want you to answer this question. Is it possible for the skydiver to wait 18 seconds before pulling the parachute cord? Figure that out.
Can't believe why would we do
All right, Preston, what'd you say? Yes or no? Why not? Okay, so you plugged in 18 for T and you got a negative answer? So what would that mean? He'd be underground, wouldn't he? Is that a problem if you're a skydiver? Yeah, you don't want to be underground. So if that height ends up being negative, that is bad. Very, very bad. So no, he doesn't want to wait that long.